You'll be like gods. Thus Satan tempted our first parents, and they yielded. And unfortunately, humans have been yielding to this temptation ever since. History is full of kings and emperors who declared themselves divine and caused others to worship them. One incident of this is recorded in the book of Daniel, when Cyrus issued a decree. His royal officials came to him and said, "O King Darius, live forever." So the royal administrators, the prefects, the satraps, advisors, and governors all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man except the next 30 days, except to you, shall be thrown into a lion's den. The Roman emperors often claimed that they were gods. Many kings in Europe, though they may not have said, "I'm a god," claimed the divine right of kings. They were doing God's work. They were in a special relationship with God. And as we move forward in history, the 19th century, we have the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote these following words. "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, 'I seek God, I seek God, whether is God?' And he cried, 'I shall tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we then, murderers of all murderers, comfort ourselves? What is the holiest and most powerful of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe the blood off? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to seem worthy of it?'" God is dead. Long live humans who have become gods. But, as we're well aware of, this idea that we can take the place of God has led to disastrous results. The loss of the garden, paradise, an intimate relationship with God was lost. How many evils have been done by kings claiming divinity or the divine right of kings to do whatever they was, and no one could challenge them. And mere decades after Nietzsche described God as being dead, we see the horrendous result in the Holocaust. 6 million Jews killed. But you might be wondering, well, how does that relate to us and to our recent survey of responsibility? Week 1, we talked about personal responsibility, that I need to own what I do. Second of all, dealt with morality or moral responsibility. And that is, I shouldn't do just things because I can do them. I have a responsibility to restrain myself. And then last week, we talked about collective responsibility. Own that we have a responsibility to seek the good and welfare of even our enemies. And this brings us to this 4th week and our 4th responsibility. We encounter this in the account of the Tower of Babel. Rabbi Sachs describes this as ontological responsibility. I know that's a huge philosophical term, but what it's talking about is an awareness of the nature of our being. Who are we? In other words, we have a responsibility to let God be God, and we recognize our role as human beings, and that is not God's role. Again, it might seem like a really obvious statement. Of course God is God, and we are not. Yet in practice, we get it wrong and go off in the wrong directions. Humans suffer from various illusions, and I'm not talking about people who are genuinely mentally ill. Some of us believe that we can take complete control of our lives and our destinies. It's all up to us. Others approach God as we can control him. If I do this, God, then you're going to do that. If I give you a lot of money, you're going to give me a lot of money back. Others have found that God is relevant. God is unnecessary. God is dead. And we see that in our society a lot. But we must struggle against this thinking. We must remember that God is God, the ruler of the heavens and the earth. Listen to the prophet Isaiah as he puts us and God in proper perspective. In chapter 40, he says, all people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall. There is human beings, frail, fragile, temporary. And then he goes on to declare the reality of who God is. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its peoples are like grasshopper. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces rulers of the world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root, than he blows them and they wither, and the whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. God is powerful. God rules over the universe. God is God, and human beings need to recognize who they are. God is grandiose and powerful. We quickly fade. Adam, Eve, kings and emperors, Nietzsche failed to remember the distinction. And when we look at the Tower of Babel, we see the same thing happening. So we know that they began to build the tower. As we look at this, there's some real historical connectedness here. The biblical description of the tower fits well with historical evidence. There are many examples of these kinds of towers being built in the Near East. They're called the ziggurat. Rabbi Sachs says, just a second. Essentially, these towers, of which remain at least 30 have been discovered, were man-made holy mountains, the mountains being the place where the heaven and earth most visibly meet. Inscriptions on several of these buildings decoded by archaeologists refer, as does the Torah, to the idea that their top reaches to heaven. And they said, come and let us build a city and a tower with its top to heaven. So here's this historical accuracy of the biblical account. There is a reality taking place here. People were building these things. You see, he says, humans learn to create bricks. With this new technological discovery, they built these incredible structures. But as we see in this story and so many other times, all this technology led to the development of pride and hubris. Sachs gives an assessment. Intoxicated with their technological prowess, the builders of Babel believed that they had become like gods and could not construct their own construct their own cosmopolises, their man-made miniature universe. Not content with earth, they wanted to build an abode in heaven. And even more succinctly, because this is key to what we're talking about here, Rabbi Sachs writes, the sin of the builders is unclear, but it's indicated by two key words in the text. The story is framed beginning in with a key phrase, the whole earth. In between, there's a series of similar sounding words. The story of Babel is a drama about two key words, the first sentence of the Torah. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Heaven is the domain of God, and earth is the domain of man. By attempting to build a tower that would reach heaven, the builders of Babel were trying to be like God. These men had concluded with their technological advance, they have conquered the earth. Now all they had left is to possess heaven. Doesn't this have a rather modern feel to it? How many modern human creations leave us feeling increasingly invulnerable? Our technological prowess leads us to believe that all our problems can be solved. We can overcome all obstacles, including death. According to some news reports on the meeting between Chinese Prime Minister Xi and Putin, Russian Prime Minister Putin, one of their conversations was about medical technology. That one day would lead to eventual immortality. that with the right transplants in that, they could live forever. Again, as the pride grows, we begin to believe that we've outgrown our need for God. To summarize, their sin is, we've conquered earth, now we're going to reach to heaven because that is ours to possess also. But there are natural consequences to this, and we see this in the Tower of Babel. There's an interesting aspect to this text that Rabbi Sachs points out. There are two words that are played off of each other. The word for brick uses the consonants LVN, and the word for chaos, NVL. So they're read backwards. And often, Sachs says, the Torah uses a literary technique to make a point. And the point that they're trying to make here is this creation of these bricks and the ability to build eventually leads to chaos. The writer of Genesis is making the point that this technological achievement, this idea that they were going to reach heaven and keep us all as one humanity, resulted in a totally different outcome. God created chaos in an attempt to humble these people, to take their pride down, and allow them to remember again the ontological reality that God is God and man is man. Again, they built this, and the whole purpose was so that we will have a name on earth and we will not be scattered throughout the earth. And what happened? They were scattered throughout the earth. But again, what does this have to do with us? You've heard all I said, but you might be questioning, how does this apply to me and you? We're not building a tower. We're not claiming to be God or declaring God's death. But what about those desires to be in control, to tell God to do what we want him to do? Our bitterness when God doesn't do it. In the Lectio 365 devotional this week, the author of this writes, I often come to God my Father and tell him exactly what I believe he should do for me in order to make my life whole, fulfilled, meaningful, healthy, or any number of other desirable things. It's easy for me to map out a plan for my happiness, then ask, more like direct, God to make it so. I see myself in the lost son of the parable, who thought he knew what would bring him life. How often do we approach God saying, God, this is what I need, give it to me, and I know my life will be fulfilled. And yet God gives us something different, and we become frustrated or discouraged or give up on him. In some ways, we're playing God at that point. As with any other sin, every human being is vulnerable to the sin of trying to be God. Ours may not be as grandiose an attempt to rule over others and claim real divinity, nor the sin of assuming that human progress will make God irrelevant. But we can fall into the sin that when we assume that God gives us our whims, and if he does not, somehow God has failed us. So how do we contrast this? As we've gone through the other elements of responsibility, Abraham has been our model, and we will see this to be the case again. Abraham, when we come to the story, the account of his being told by God to sacrifice his son, shows us how we should respond. Again, remember the situation. Abraham is promised a son through Sarah to be his heir. He waits patiently for that to happen. Finally, after years of waiting, God gives him a son. Then Abraham gets the message, go sacrifice your son. This last command makes no sense. If there was ever time to turn to God and say, you're getting it wrong, God, this was the moment. Now, let's be very clear. God would be fine with that. God is open to us questioning him. I'm not saying that we don't ever say, God, I don't know what you're doing. Or I don't understand what you're doing. Please help me understand. But what we should look at here is what Abraham does. He responds to God's command by obeying it. Again, listen to Hebrews' assessment of this. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his son, his one and only son, even though God had said it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could raise him from the dead if need be. Do you see? Abraham did what we would call, or what Rabbi Sachs said, is he had a response ability. Put a hyphen in there. Response ability. He could respond. He had the ability to respond to God as God asked him to do. He trusted that God would be God, and if need be, God would raise his son back to life. God would in the end do the right thing. Abraham responded to God's command by accepting that God was God and that he was a human being and he was commanded to obey. God is God. We are human beings and we are called to follow upon God's commands. As we come to our conclusion, that word ontological responsibility, that idea of who we are, what our being is that God is God. We're not God. We're human beings, limited, weak, temporary. We don't see the big picture. But if you have the wrong image of God, this can be scary. Because God is a God of whim and he'll do crazy things to us. No, remember what we studied earlier this year. In Exodus 34, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. When we understand the nature of God as loving and forgiving and gracious, we should not fear letting God be God. Matter of fact, it is absolutely essential that we learn to do that. We need to let go of our pride and our hubris, thinking that we understand or that we can do it alone, that we don't need God. We need to learn that response, that ability to respond to God as Abraham did. To learn the importance of obeying. I conclude with what Rabbi Sachs says. Only when God is God can man be man. And that means keeping heaven and earth distinct.